Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am Alicia Branham, author, coach, speaker, and founder of Brand Marketing, and this is the Alicia Branham Podcast. I'm creating this podcast because there is a conversation that isn't happening loudly enough, especially in sales-driven, relationship-based industries. I've spent years working inside companies, along sales team, and directly with leadership across manufacturers, manufacturer reps, and distributors. And I keep seeing the same pattern repeat itself. There's a growing gap between how businesses operate and how they need to evolve. I can't tell you how many times I've had the exact same conversation with different companies, a manufacturer, a rep firm, a distributor. And someone in leadership will say to me, our outside sales team refuses to post on LinkedIn. They don't want to take pictures. They don't want to share content. They're not willing to put in the effort because you know what? They don't see the value. And what's interesting for me is that conversation sounds like a social media problem, man. But you know what? It never is. It's a communication problem. It's a leadership problem. And it's a mindset problem because sales teams don't resist visibility. They resist not understanding why it matters. And that's when I realized that wasn't a one company issue. It was an industry issue. So listen, let me talk to you about who this podcast is for. This podcast is for manufacturers, manufacturer reps, distributors, any sales-driven organization that's looking for change, right? This is for leaders who are responsible for growth, whether you own a company, run a territory, manage a team, or carry a number every month. If you're the one making decisions, signing checks, supporting sales teams, and trying to keep everything moving forward, this podcast is for you. And if you ever felt like you're carrying the vision alone, you're not. Listen, I remember a conversation I had with a business owner, someone smart, capable, and respected in their industry. We weren't talking about marketing at first. We started talking about growth at their organization, the pressures they were under, and what it actually feels like to be responsible for the results at your business. It's kind of scary. And at one point, they said something that really, really stuck with me. They said, I feel like I'm the only one carrying this. And this was someone that I know that had like 4 other partners. They had a team, they had a salesperson, they had customers. But when it came to vision, direction, and decisions, it all landed on them. And that weight was super heavy. And they didn't say it dramatically. They didn't complain to me. They just stated it as literally as fact. And that's when I realized how many leaders in this industry are quietly isolated. Not because they don't have people around them, but because they don't have many places where they can actually say what they're thinking, right? That conversation comes back to me all the time because I hear it again and again and again from all the clients that I work with. But listen, let's talk about me before brand was born, right? Before brand marketing ever existed, before I ever owned a company, I built and ran an in-house advertising and marketing department for a large valve manufacturer in the Carolinas. And I want to be clear about something. I wasn't just sitting behind a desk doing creative work or marketing. That wasn't really my job. It was at first, but then I was on sales calls. I went out with reps. I sat in meetings with industrial and commercial customers, and I listened to their objections, real objections, price objections, trust objections, timing objections, and probably tariff objections by now. And I watched how buying decisions were actually made, not how people said they were made. Because in the PHCP and PVF world, where manufacturers, reps, and distributors all play a role, where relationships are everything, where trust is built rep by rep, and where sales cycles take time, marketing has to work hand in hand with sales, or it doesn't work at all. I want to tell you a little story about one of my clients and something in my business. After more than 16 years in this industry, one thing has become incredibly clear to me. Relationships aren't a nice to have. They are the business. I've watched deals get done not because of a spec sheet, not because of a price list, not because of a marketing campaign, but because somebody trusted the person sitting across the table. It's as simple as that. And I've seen reps keep business because they showed up consistently. I've seen distributors win accounts because they picked up the phone. I've seen manufacturers lose ground when relationships were treated like transactions, man. That's just not the way to do business. And that's when it really hit me. In this industry, relationships don't support the business. They shape it. Everything else, marketing, messaging, tools, has to respect the reality or it doesn't work. Let's talk about the real problem that I keep seeing with communication inside of this industry that we're all working in. Something that I consistently see across manufacturers, reps, and distributors. And it had nothing to do with marketing. I saw a serious lack of communication and emotional intelligence plaguing these industries. And I don't say that as an outsider. I say that as someone who has struggled with that myself. Seriously, I'm a business owner. We're really good at products, territories, numbers, and performance, but we're often terrible at communication, self-awareness, managing pressure, and having hard conversations. That's the worst, right? Sales teams are frustrated with marketing. Marketing's frustrated with leadership. In leadership, they're frustrated with everybody, right? They are. And nobody's actually saying what needs to be said. It's not because they didn't care. It's a communication problem. I want to share a situation that really enforced this lesson for me. We had a client who reduced their hours with us. And what it made it difficult wasn't the change itself. Actually, it was a lack of communication surrounding that. There was no clear conversation, there was no context, and there was no heads up. And that was hard for me as a business owner, but because nothing was communicated on their end, it triggered a whole series of decisions on our end. This just happened last week. We started making assumptions. We adjusted our resources. We had to protect our team, and we reacted instead of responding. I'm human, right? And here's the hard truth. No one was trying to cause damage, but the absence of communication created confusion, frustration, and unnecessary pressure on both sides. That situation was a reminder for me that silence isn't neutral. In leadership, silence creates stories, and those stories drive decisions, sometimes not good ones. So here's the part most people don't want to admit. I wasn't immune to this, right? I've been reactive. I've avoided conversations. I've communicated out of frustration instead of clarity. I've let pressure dictate my tone instead of my discipline. So let's talk about the universal truth for business owners. Here's what I've learned. Every business owner and leader in this industry has this in common. We really do. We're decisive. We're driven. We're wired to solve problems. But the same wiring can work against us. We move fast. We assume alignment. We expect people to just get it. I'm a victim of that, right? And when they don't, communication breaks down, trust erodes, teams disengage, and growth stalls. Period. That's what happens. And you know what? That is not a marketing problem, friends. That is a leadership problem. That is a leadership problem. So listen, I want to talk about a little internal shift about me. I wrote a book called Sick and Tired of Me, and it's kind of my journey began because of that title. One day, I realized something really uncomfortable myself in this quest to become a better leader. If I wanted better communication, better leadership, and better results, it had to start with myself. Not fixing everybody else, not trying to be everybody's savior, just worrying about me, not blaming an industry, just fixing how I showed up. So I'm going to share a story with you about how I was my own bottleneck in a situation. There was a moment in my business where I had to come face to face with my own leadership gaps. We had a client whose internal marketing manager had become increasingly pushy over time. Deadlines got tighter, communication got sharper, boundaries started to blur. What really escalated it for me was that their behavior drove away my only web developer, someone that I trusted and valued and had a relationship for years. I was angry, I was protective of my team, and if I'm being honest, I let emotion get the best of me. Instead of slowing down, instead of addressing it calmly, I reacted and I fired the client. At the time, I felt justified, but later I had to sit with it and the hard truth of what I had done. That situation needed leadership, and I let emotion get in the way instead. And that forced me to reflect on not what happened, like how I showed up when things got hard, right? And that's where that phrase came from, sick and tired of me. I looked around and I knew that I wanted something more in my life, and I wanted to know why the heck I was built this way. And once you stop blaming your circumstances and you start taking responsibility, things start to get a lot easier. That's uncomfortable, but honestly, that's powerful, and that's how change happens. As brands started to grow, I realized something critical. Building a business and scaling a business are not the same thing. So back in 2024, I was blessed to be accepted into the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program. There was a moment during that program where it really stopped me in my tracks. You know, they weren't talking about marketing and they weren't talking about clients. They were talking about numbers, capacity, margins, and growth. And I was running my business originally like a good operator and not like a CEO. I knew how to do the work, I knew how to serve the clients, and I knew how to solve problems, but I hadn't fully stepped into building systems that could grow without me being involved in everything. That program forced me into stop asking, how do I handle more work? And start asking, what kind of company am I actually building? That's where the 5-year plan came from for me at Brand Marketing. And that's where my $5 million vision came from, not as a number, but as a marker for building something intentional, sustainable, healthy, and strong enough to last. So let me talk to you about why I built brand marketing. Brand marketing was actually built with intention. I took everything I learned from manufacturers, from reps, from distributors, from leadership mistakes, from mindset work, and from learning how to scale. And over time, as I work with more companies in this space, manufacturers, rep firms, and distributors, I started to see a bigger pattern. No matter the size of the company, no matter the product, no matter the role they played in the industry, every single one of them needed the same thing. They needed to look good, they needed to sound credible, and they needed help building a brand that they could be proud of. Not flashy marketing, not trends, but marketing that actually reflected who they were and how their industry works. What I kept seeing was this gap. Companies either worked with agencies that didn't understand their industry, or they tried to do it themselves without the time, tools, or perspective. And even funnier, they try to get their sales team to do that work. And I realized something important. These companies just didn't need marketing help, man. They needed a partner who understood their world, understood their buyers, their sales cycles, and their relationships. That realization is what solidified why brand marketing needed to exist and why I had to build this thing differently, right? Because companies in this space, they don't need more marketing. They need marketing that actually works in a relationship-driven industry. That's what brand marketing was built to do. Let's talk about why this podcast matters, right? Listen, I'm going to provide you clarity, right? The companies that win, they're not louder. They're clearer, friends. They're willing to evolve. They're willing to look inward, and they're willing to lead differently. And that's what we're going to talk about here. If this episode resonated with you, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think. What are you going to work on this year? Marketing, mindset, sales? Pressure shapes strength. Decisions shape leaders. And what you choose to become is always in your control. I'll see you on the next episode of the Alicia Branham Podcast.